The title of this one might be a little misleading, so let me clarify something first. I don't mean that the rules for making a character in your game of choice don't matter. I'm talking instead about that je ne sais quoi that makes them go from being a stat block to a character in a story. There's no wrong way to come up with that. The most common method I've seen people discuss is that they come up with an idea for their character, and every one of their decisions they make when building them is to support that idea. They want a character that's lithe, dexterous, and lived most of their life in the woods. So in D&D, strength and constitution aren't their primary concern, so much as dexterity and wisdom. Their class would then likely be ranger or druid, and they'd pick skills that reflect their ability to live off the land. Cap it off with hermit or outlander background if you're playing 5th edition, and you've got your forest-dwelling person that lives off the land. The method I like to use, though, is one that I naturally gravitated towards when I first played World of Darkness. I just sort of picked a bunch of skills and attributes that sounded cool, and made up some kind of explanation for why he would have those skills. I gave him a high strength and stamina, low intelligence but high resolve, and high presence with everything else being average. My justification for that after the fact was he was a big brute whose mind can't be changed, even when people are willing to stand up to him. His skills were mostly physical, primarily firearms and melee weapons, with some survival and driving. Everything else was pretty low, if there was any dots in it at all. And I justified that by saying he was ex-military and he was getting his life back together after returning to civilian life, and thus he didn't have any defining features other than knowing how to kill people. I finished off with the giant merit since I wanted more health and combat marksman fighting style, just to accent his ability to use guns. The giant merit continued to play off him being a brute, while the fighting style merit played off of him being in the military. I really only wanted 2 things out of this character: somebody tough and somebody that knew how to fight. And I was okay with sacrificing being able to do anything but those 2 things to get it. And that worked into his backstory as well. He was discharged dishonorably for getting into too many fights with his squad mates. That brings me to an interesting point I'd like to make about telling stories through RPGs that you don't normally get in more traditional fiction writing. You'll typically have a finite amount of resources for determining what your character is capable of. So, while a character that's capable of just about anything in fiction is often mocked as being a Mary Sue, this isn't necessarily the case in an RPG, since everything has some numerical value and thus some sort of cost associated with it. If a character in Hero System spends 30 points to have a base roll of 11 and 10 skills, another character could just as easily use those 30 points to have a base roll of 17 in just 2. Both can be explained and both have their own advantages and disadvantages, and there's plenty of other options between those 2 extremes as well. And to bring it back home to the original topic, the same can be said of creating your character and bringing them to life. There's not necessarily a wrong way, and there's no dichotomy. After all, when I was making my World of Darkness character for the first time, I did come up with the explanations after each step. However, as I went along, I tended to stick what was already established in previous steps, which sort of blends the idea of coming up with a concept and picking things to match that, as opposed to picking stuff that looked cool and explaining it after the fact.